All right, thanks for coming. It's nice to see everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We might get a few more folks in, I hope. But let me start talking about the lecture, and then we can all join in and discuss it. This lecture, Mobility in Relaxation, Suffering Through Attachment of the Life Force to Negative Situations. It's about three things, right? The way I see it. The first thing is the creative substance that we live in, that's moldable, that's malleable. And the guide on the first page, it's so interesting. He says, talks about the power, and all the kinds of powers are unified. It's physical, electrical, atomic, mental, makes no difference. It's all the same power. We have a little bit of feedback here.
I think we're being invaded.
Who's twice?
Me?
Who's got the feedback? Who's guilty?
Somebody might be on 2 times.
Oh, you might be on 2 times, Kay?
I think that's why we get feedback.
I don't know what to do.
Oh,
I'm just turning it off.
Let's
Is that
see.
you, Joe?
If you guys are in the same room with 2 different, now we're talking. Hey, Darlene, hi. Okay. Well, let me just rephrase what I said, that the lecture is about 3 things. And one is this incredible, impressionable mass that the guide says we can mold through our consciousness. He says that all the different kinds of powers are the same, whether it's physical, electrical, or atomic power or mental power makes no difference, for it's all the same power or different facets of the same power. This power is a very impressionable mass, a substance that can be governed and molded only by consciousness. Now that's a very interesting thing, and it's sort of at variance with the way that we commonly think of power, right, and the world. We think it has nothing to do with consciousness. We think that power is basically physical, created by science, created by physical forces. And what the guide says is that it's really ultimately created by consciousness. I mean, that's something to say, and the guide is always talking about the great power and the great potential that we have with our consciousness and with our intent. The second thing that the lecture is about this concept of mobility and relaxation. And that, I think, is something that is pretty easy to get. In other words, when we truly feel that we're in a flowing state of effort and relaxation, we feel great. And I think that we do accomplish that or achieve that at certain times, like when we dive into a project and we just feel like we're cooking on all 4 burners. Or if we're working out, we're an athlete, we're putting in effort, but we're also relaxing in another way. So this idea that the distortion is that on the one hand, we believe that relaxation becomes immobility and stagnation. And on the other hand, mobility becomes striving effort, intense effort. I think that's something that's quite easy to connect with. All of us, I think, feel the concept of laziness is something that, should I be active or not? What decision should I make? And I think this again goes to the issue of the ego and where your decision is coming from, because the ego is always, the way I see it, fundamentally unsatisfied. With the ego, it's always an either or. Should I rest now? Should I act now? You're always evaluating and deciding what you should do. Whereas from a unitive self, it's sort of one. The relaxation and the effort come together. Then the third thing the lecture is about this concept of the attachment of pleasure to negative situations. And, a quote that I always remember for this lecture, where the guide says that if evil wasn't tied to positive things, it would be, quote unquote, a very short duration. And that's so obviously true. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, here it is. And on page 3, he says, real destructiveness is therefore not only a distortion of truth and of the constructive universal powers, but a distortion that must be permeated with the powerful life principle and its constructive power. If the positive life principle were not involved and inadvertently used, then evil or destructiveness would be of very short duration. So, you know, the parallel I always think about is the Nazi era, you know, where the fascists, where the Nazi war machine had some positive characteristics. It was strong, it was powerful. They developed, you know, weapons of mass destruction, but it was allied to evil. So that's why the evil was strong. If these positive characteristics, in other words, the ability to marshal an army, which I suppose is positive, the ability to create public buildings and create weapons and all those things which are positive in themselves in terms of creative aspects. If those things had not been turned into a negative direction or distorted, then the evil wouldn't have been strong enough to nearly conquer the world. I hope that's clear. I hope everyone agrees with that idea. I mean, I think when you look at, for example, all these TV programs about psycho killers and serial killers, I mean, all the novels that are out there today, I mean, these guys are very focused. They're great. They can pass themselves off as normal, right? They can hold high-level jobs. They can make a lot of money, but on the side, they're killers. They kill people, right? Whether you believe that there are many serial killers out there or not, I don't really think there are. But I think that's an excellent example of the alliance of evil with positive and constructive abilities, right? I mean, that's clear enough that, and I think you see that it's such a common theme. Like, look at all these terrorists on shows like 24 or other movies. These guys are very smart. They're planning stuff. They're executing things. Their evil would not be strong if they didn't have all these positive qualities. So the question remains, the question is, how did they and why did they, even though I'm talking about fictional characters, but how and why do people channel the evil or the constructive forces rather into evil directions? That's the other thing that this lecture is about. Suffering through attachment of the life force to negative situations. And just one other point about it, the guide also says, and this is a little kind of depressing really, he says, when you realize after having become aware of this process, the process that is the marrying of the evil with the positive stuff, he says, when you realize how many people, regardless of their outer action, can experience the pleasure principle only in fantasies of cruelty, you will understand that this is the actual nucleus of war, of cruelty as a whole. This should not make you feel guilty. It should rather enlighten you and free you to allow your inner processes to transform. So this is sort of a kind of indictment of a lot of the way that people are. And you know, when the guide says so many people can experience the pleasure principle only in fantasies of cruelty, I think you just have to look at, you know, TV and pornography and video games and like, there it is, right? It's sad, really. So let me just put out one other thing, which is that the key to the lecture maybe can be found on page 4. He says, evolution, my friends, means that each individual, through the process of personal self-confrontation and self-realization, gradually changes the inner orientation of the pleasure principle. So he's saying that our task is to do two things. Number one, allow yourself to feel where you attach the pleasure principle to negative situations. And then once you come to terms with it, realize it, let it out, then you meditate to reorient the pleasure principle to positive and constructive situations. And the guide makes the point in the questions and answers that drama is exciting, you know, negative drama, like people get into a lot of conflict and it's energizing, it's exciting. The pleasure is exciting. And the guide says, hey, you know what? the pleasure does not come from the negativity and the drama. The pleasure is actually deeper than that. And you can recapture the pleasure in a positive direction if you are prepared to first acknowledge it and then meditate about it. So that is my overview of the lecture, ladies and gentlemen. So any thoughts?
It was a great review. Thank
Mhm.
you. It was excellent.
Second that. It was great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to third it, Alan. That was really excellent. It's a very complicated and dense lecture, and it's got a lot of moving parts, and while they all weave together, they can also be quite disparate. So the way you were able to just pull it all together, Joel and I were but we were on mute, but we were both saying, "Wow, he's really excellent." So thanks.
Thank you. I mull it over. I think about the lecture. I take it on the subway. I kind of look at it and kind of let it permeate me, and I sort of like get with it. Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Alan?
Sure.
The part where the negative pleasure or negative attachment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've listened to the lecture and also read it a few times, and so what's the he said that you have a powerful key to your life if you can get through this. So I'm wondering, like to freeze frame on that part, right? So who doesn't have a negative experience that they've had? Everyone's had a negative experience. So how do we, even whether it's the big thing that happened in life that, whether it was the defining thing or it was just something that happened yesterday, or, you know what I mean? Like we can harness that power if we can turn this into a tool.
Well, I think he says first you have to recognize it. And I think that also goes about the images. In other words, the images that where you tied pain to pleasure. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So then he goes on to, maybe in the course of this meeting I can find it, but there's got to be, I feel like, at the end of every lecture, I just go, oh, wow, that's great. Oh, it's so such powerful stuff. But I'm thinking that I'm trying to resist the part of me that just wants to be amazed and actually get a tool I can use.
Well, I think that the guide says, you have to ask yourself, how do I attach pleasure to negativity?
Yeah.
Right? And
Totally. I know that I do that. I'm sure that I do
that. So you have to write down, meditate for clarity, and write down in a journal the ways in which you feel you do that.
I already know. I don't have to.
But the guide always talks like this path is not easy. I mean, he always says like, write it down. And you're thinking, no, I'm not. I don't do that.
No,
I
already got, so everything he's saying, I pretty much it's like, it's almost embarrassing how very, very personal this lecture is. But so what happens when well, if I know the ways that I feel like, wow, yes, this is, well, I guess it's paying the price. I think it's the law of paying the price, because there's at the end of it all, there are spiritual laws, certain laws. And if you don't follow them, if a person doesn't follow them, it's, the result is always unsatisfying.
And it's going to and you're going to have to pay the price down the road anyway.
Mm-hmm. He said.
Well, Rita, I think that your question, I have a very good answer to your question, which is, he says that basically our pathwork is sort of in two components. Bottom of page 4, he says, Now, remember, it's so important to know this, that there's the outer will and then there's the inner will, right?
Mhm.
Now, what's the outer will? The outer will is when you determine that you're going to get up, meditate in the morning, pray for guidance, you are going to nourish your spiritual self, you are going to um, create the conditions for transformation in your life. And it doesn't happen. The outer will doesn't make it happen. It happens kind of as a byproduct. So what I'm saying is that if you are able to write down those things, the ways in which you attach negativity to pleasure, that is doing the work of the outer will. The outer will is doing that. The outer will is saying, I'm going to focus on writing down. In other words, the outer will has a very important role to play in this, we call the purification process, by doing certain exercises, which is the meditation or the daily review or sharing with another person. And then the interchange comes about kind of as a byproduct. So do you know what I'm saying? In other
Yeah.
words, you can't force it. You've got to
Okay.
create the conditions. And as we always say, it's like the outer will, you can go up to the door, but you can open the door, but you can't walk through it.
Right.
You can't walk through it to grace. Only the inner will can do that.
Yeah. No, I like what you're saying. So the outer will, so it's like if you want to take a vacation, then, but you don't know how it's going to happen, all you can do is create the time, the finances, the destination, you could even pack your bags. You could do all kinds of things, and then know about the place you're going to, study about it. Is that what you mean?
I think that is sort of a good analogy, which is, in other words, let's say you prepare, that's quite a good analogy. Let's say that you do certain things so that you can take a vacation, right? You work
Right.
hard, you get your time off, you make your plane reservations, and you do everything, and then you get there. And once you're there, you fulfilled all the conditions for like a deepening or a spiritual awareness or a transcendence. But your outer will, the will that organized and created the vacation, stops. Once you're there, a different part takes over. I think that's what they call grace. In other words, it was when you do everything you can do, and then boom, other things start happening.
I have a good one, Ellen. So it's like if you want to, if we have a meeting, that we have to have enough space in the room for everyone to be there.
Except on Zoom.
Except on Zoom, but that's why Tracy and Joel have have space, and then there's enough space for everybody, and we are able to come in, and there's room for everyone. But that's not a given. It has to be prepared in order for that to happen. Right?
I'll buy that. I'll go along with that. Okay. Any other thoughts? I mean, and I think the fact that just the right number of people come to every one of Tracy's evenings, and we never have to kick anyone out. That's sort of indicative that the inner will is going on and something greater is happening. Any other thought? Anyone want to talk about the attachment of negativity to pleasure?
I do.
Really?
And I don't know if this will answer Rita's question a little more, but my experience with this lecture was that I also knew my negative attachment, and I went in and sat with it, and I know that I had kind of a trauma when I was a little kid when my parents moved from one state to another. And I've known all my life that was really difficult for me and really hard. And I went back into that time and really spent some time in meditation and realized that like the pain I was experiencing at that time that created this negative attachment was that I missed my aunt so badly when we moved from Pennsylvania into Delaware. And I sat with that pain, and I could be wrong, but my understanding of how this work happens is if you can sit with that original pain and feel it as much as you can, that's what kind of loosens the grip that, you know, these negative things have on you, right? And yeah, so that was just my experience. I don't know if that's explained well.
I think it is.
Wow.
You feel the ache of the missing her, which
Mhm.
sort of relates also to things in your life now, right?
Yeah, well, what it is going back and feeling the original pain that created that attachment is a way to loosen the attachment. And
Right. And you say, I don't have
yeah.
to necessarily have a big, I don't have to have a big emotional investment in the fact that I'm missing somebody or the fact that I'm not with someone.
Right, and it's like, because I'm an adult now, that pain was easy for me to sit with, relatively,
Yeah,
and I've been able to let go of it. Whereas as a child, it was just so overwhelming. The only thing I knew to do with it was create this negative attachment. And so, yeah, that's just what I did, and it's been pretty
I
cool.
mean, you associated pleasure with it in some way, right?
Well, my understanding of the lecture is that as a child, you need to attach it to life force to actually get yourself through it. That's the momentum that gets yourself through it.
Correct.
And so that's why that negative attachment happens. And so if you can go back to the point of creation, so to speak, of that negative attachment, that's where you can actually sit and meditate and undo what was done. And again, I'm sure like it's a process, right? Like it's not like now, woo, all the negative is gone, but it's just a way to begin healing that ground zero.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think that's so. To try to meditate on the power that it has over you and why it has so much power. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I found it so interesting that the attachment is a positive thing. I know there's complicated there, but that the negative feelings that I had getting into being a child at different moments, and the negative feelings are so overwhelming, but somehow life gives you an opportunity. I'm going to call it some kind of power in a way. I think there's a word in the lecture that's different for it. He doesn't use power, but it helps the child to feel that there's something that they can hold on to in this terrible situation where you have nothing. There's nothing there, but you got something, and at least I've got this. And it's a pleasure. The pleasure. What is it? The primary? No, principle. It's the pleasure principle that I got. And the funny thing is, I think, at least the way I see it for me, is that turned into saying, well, I have something. So it gave me a feeling of, and clearly it's negative. It's tied to the negative, but which gives it the strength that it has something, and that's why I'm calling it power, because the strength comes from the life force, used in a negative way, but it's definitely power. So I felt like it was good for me to get in touch with the feeling that as negative as it is, it still made me survive. It was a survival mechanism. And unfortunately, we use the same survival mechanism until we were able to see it, to recognize it. And of course, for me, it's pushing people away. It's not don't get too close. But
Right.
in any case, yeah.
Right, that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, don't get too close. But that's my power. At least I have that. I can say, no way, I'm not going there. And I'll make the decision. My battery is running low. Okay, I'm finished with talking, and also I'm going to plug my battery in.
All right. Yeah, right, as the guide says that the first instance of attaching cruelty to the pleasure principle will make a relationship so hazardous that it is often avoided altogether. That's what you're saying, right? Because
Yeah.
the pain you experienced in surviving was so problematic that you associate that with a relationship. And so then if you embark on a relationship, the pain will come back and you don't want that. So better not to have it.
And also, I will bring negativity into the relationship, even though it's not there at all.
Yeah.
I can be with someone that's happened more than once in my life that we're getting along, we're like this, everything is good, and I know I'm going to screw it up. And I want to screw it up because that's where my pleasure is, where my control is, where my power is I'll screw it up. At least I have that. It sounds ridiculous, but it's good to see, very good to see.
That is
Well
what the lecture says. Yeah.
Well said.
Mm.
I was struck. I haven't seen anything in the lectures about the child doing something destructive to make it more bearable. You know, what I call as a psychologist defense mechanism, setting up the defense mechanisms for survival. And I haven't read anywhere in the lectures anything like that sentence, that the child does this to make it more bearable.
Well, it does say that in this lecture.
Yeah, it does.
Yes. Yeah.
But does it say it anywhere else?
Oh, I'm sure in many lectures. I mean, there is a lecture called The Defense. But yeah, I mean, life is about making apparent compromises so you can survive, which are compromises which are misguided because the child doesn't understand the price they're paying for making those compromises.
When you're trying to survive, Alan, actually the price doesn't matter. When you really, as a 4-year-old, I'm talking about, it doesn't matter. You need to, I can't breathe. If I can't breathe, I'm going to do anything to be able to breathe. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll pay the price.
Yeah, the goal of survival is to survive, period. End of story. That's it. You do whatever you have to do.
Of course, then you get old enough that you can look and say, I don't want to pay that price anymore.
Hopefully. And the guide says that at the end, there's 2 ways to escape. He says, either you experience the pleasure principle only in fantasies of cruelty, which is kind of depressing, or, I think I was on the wrong page. He says, at the very end, the first is the strict denial so that no awareness, even in fantasy, exists. In other words, you don't want to acknowledge the tie into cruelty that you have in the pleasure principle. And then he says, the second applies to those who are perfectly aware of their fantasies but are unable to experience the pleasure principle in any way, whether or not they actually have relationships with others. Then he says that occurs when sex and love are separated, eros and love, or eros and sex, which is kind of interesting. Now, is everybody familiar with those 3 concepts? Love, sex, and eros, what they are?
I could use a review.
All right.
Yeah, I could too.
Well, here, this is what he says. Now, the love force is the force that binds things together, and the love is an act of will, the guide says. In other words, you will and intend to love, and you can love. The sex force is a kind of not intellectual or not even mediated by thought, just the impulse to unify. The sex force is, just kind of drives creation forward. Eros is more like a romantic excitement that people feel. And so the guide says that generally, very often people meet in a relationship and they have a lot of eros. They're very excited about each other. But that eros fades quickly. It's the excitement of the new. And because people stop revealing themselves to each other, eros goes away. And then people miss it. And then they start looking elsewhere for that eros, that excitement.
Thank
So
you.
that's what those three concepts are in the Pathwork.
Well, this is Marion. May I comment?
Of course,
Where are you?
Hi. So
she's
those of you who
invisible.
were not in right at 7, I'm on the phone, but I can see everybody. I just don't have a camera to be seen. So I thank you, Alan, for bringing in that Love Arrow Sex lecture. It reminds me of John Parakis, who taught us so much. That was his favorite lecture. When anybody invited him to go anywhere to give a talk, that was the lecture. So it's really a very grounding lecture. And the other thing you mentioned, Alan, that I want to just elaborate a little bit about is you mentioned in the defense lecture, because in there also, it has in there that when you revert into a defense, and it has in that lecture, you have either chosen the pseudo solution of aggressiveness and or withdrawal from life and or appeasement that robs you of your integrity. Now, those are just words I'm reading off from that defense lecture, but that segues into the personality defense types in the Pathwork, which is one of the foundational lectures, because when I know how I withdraw, because mine is the appeasement that robs me of my integrity, and psychologically that's called codependency. So for me, having to work on that all these years, being trained in core energetics and in how to go through the lower self, which goes to the lower self lectures, is that I've been, because of many disappointments in my life where I have expectations, that's a marriage that ended horribly. I've got children who were very devoted to their father who had abused me. I've got grandchildren who I took care of for years, and after they became teenagers, hardly see them. So I have a lot of grudges. And so, but I have a toolbox, and that's what you were talking about also, Alan, having ways to enter into all of this. So one of my analogies is if I'm going to build some little bookshelves or something, I better know what I'm going to need. If I try to hammer when I need to saw, it's not going to work. And or if I need to put some screws in when actually I need a clamp, well, I need to expand my toolbox. So what I've found, and I've been doing the last couple of years, is allowing my lower self, which the guide said, the lower self can't be gone into to dissolve images unless, and he used the metaphor, hand of God. And that is, so I've gone into the negativity about all the people I love the most with the most intense hatred, anger, revenge, and always with the hand of God, always. And what has happened has been what the guide talks about here. All of a sudden, that shift into knowing of that I'm releasing all karmic attachments. And the greatest unconditional love arose toward my parents 2 years ago. They are totally no more karma with those souls as individuating. So I just want to put that in there, that everything we're talking about has a little arm out to another lecture that you're mentioning, Alan. And it's so important to back it up to have more tools.
Well, I think what you're saying, and this is the thing that's so interesting, that, from the ego's point of view, this is a very difficult fight. It often feels futile. But, when you create those conditions for spiritual growth, it just kind of happens. And it's sort of a remarkable feeling, a remarkable way in which, on the one hand, the ego is trying, you create the conditions for it to happen. It's like the metaphor, I think I mentioned a couple of weekends ago, or meetings ago. Just a very quick story, I'll tell you. I had two little girls, my daughters, Elaine and Samantha. And I think Elaine was 4, or Samantha was 4 and Elaine was 6. And we went to a fair, and in this fair, they had these little lockets with soil in them, and you were supposed to plant a seed in these lockets, and they were supposed to grow flowers. So anyway, they really wanted them. So I got these 2 lockets, and Samantha put her locket, and Elaine had a locket. They watered them, and Elaine's grew a flower, and Samantha's didn't. Just nothing happened. And Samantha was heartbroken. And she just said, okay, this isn't working, my locket, the flower's not going to grow. And so she put it in the car. And I parked the car somewhere to the alternate side, like it was away for a week. So I come back after a week, and the locket was in the sun, and a beautiful flower had bloomed in that locket, and she was so thrilled. In other words, the activity of trying to make something work, something happen, didn't work. And if you left it alone after creating the conditions, then the flower grew. So that's, I think, a good metaphor
Good
for
story.
our
Good one, Alan.
like.
Mhm.
Kevin, what are your thoughts? Tardia, what are your thoughts?
Alan, so yeah, I mean, there's been so much wonderful sharing right now. I've just been kind of baking in all of the wisdom that you guys are sharing with each other, because it really elucidated the lecture even deeper. Like, I read through it once before and made little notes, but what I heard from Rita initially and some of the probing of the material, followed by Kay, and everybody's contribution here was really deepening for me, just to sit and listen with it, including yours, Alan. One of the things I think that you've inspired me to connect through, or all of you have inspired me to connect through, to how I feel it in my life, is that, and I didn't get this from the lecture itself until you started talking about it, was that, initially it's a survival game. A lot of where we're at as a child, like Kay was mentioning, and we move into like this area of building structures in our life just very unconsciously. I mean, it's just a standard thing, right? We go straight from survival and we start to build these structures, but some of them are misconceptions. Those images, and I think that helped me understand where those images and where the needs of them, I guess, organically start to generate as a child, is that we build these structures in a way personally in order to co-opt the power that we have of the life force in a way that helps us survive. And it's that co-opting through a misconception that we have no idea that we're doing, obviously. We just want to survive, like is said. But it's through that power that's mentioned in the lecture as well here, that we're able then to have at least enough structure for the next phase of our life, which is really, achievement and goal setting, things that we're actually trying to do in our middle life. Without some level of structure, we can't build on anything. And then from there we go on further and we create relationships and dive deeper and explore, and maybe even some of us get to context or something like that. But it's a wonderful meditation, I feel, what you guys have helped me come to through listening to you all. And specifically, Kay, the one thing that I guess I wanted to circle back with on yours is that all power is one, right? I think it as Alan was saying earlier, in the lecture, it talks about, the physical power, electrical power, atomic power, mental power. It makes no difference. And it like hit me when you were talking, Kay. I'm like, wow, that's exactly why in the beginning of this lecture, the guide is bringing up all of these different facets of the same one power, because it's exactly what a child is doing in its own survival. Is it's taking whatever power is out there and saying, I'm going to use this, damn it. I'm going to get something to survive, or something. Maybe not, it's not, it feels positive maybe in the moment to nurture that grudge, or to have that hate, or to be retaliatory, or to act out against something, or to want vengeance maybe for some children, or maybe to, again, to turn some dark pleasurable thing, maybe overeating or masturbation in the teens. These kind of things are just like they can be dark forces, right? They can be turned with a misconception about what sexuality is, or what food is, or what, and yet those things are just, they're just structures. They're ways of survival. Okay, just like you said. So thank you for that. Thank you for helping it all come together in me.
Tardia, what do you think? Do you have thoughts about this?
Can you hear?
I was last night when I was laying down before I went to sleep, I was meditating on what it might have been which the negative pleasure that I felt when I was a kid. And I was able to feel it. But then I fell asleep and I never did anything about it. So like right now, I think that it was not enough that I found it, because I still feel that it plays a role in my life. Because, you know, I think that the idea is that it's supposed to transform into something else at some point. I feel like I'm in a bondage because I get negative pleasure of something that should not be really, I think I should not feel it, and I do feel it.
Right. Well, recognition is critical. So what I think
Right.
you should do is write it down as carefully as you can, and just
Okay.
let it sit there as
Okay, and
as a
just wait.
recognition. Yeah.
Right, just wait and see what happens with that.
Yeah.
Because I guess at some point it will change into something else,
Well,
hopefully.
that's the activity of the outer will, where you
Right.
have the focus to write it down and the focus to meditate. And then you've done the work. The outer will has done the work. And then something else happens. You make room for something else.
Okay.
I have a quick question about that sort of, I think, which is I've seen how I attract this negative attention from other people, but I'm also seeing how I dish it out. And then I saw that it's showing up in how one person in my life is treating the other person. In this case, it's how my brother treated my mom, and I'm really upset about how he treated my mom. And like, I want to know, is that common? Because that can give us maybe another access point into what is this negative pleasure, to pinpoint it down and put it in words.
So where's the negative pleasure in what you talked about? Is it in two different forms?
So my negative attachment is like when someone has the power to give something good and they withhold it.
Right.
And so I see how people treat me that way. I see how I treat others that way. And then with my brother, he actually did that to my mom with her assets. And so when I saw that, I was like, whoa, like this is just the same thing showing up again.
Well, I mean, I think the conclusion is that that's the way to get pleasure. Now,
yeah, like is my
you know,
filter actually, like I'm actually getting negative pleasure by filtering his action through that misconception? Is that, I mean, is that what's happening?
that
I
makes
don't know.
sense. I would think it's possible that you're
So in
kind
other
of
words, if I don't have that filter, like my other siblings are not nearly as upset as I am.
correct.
They don't have that filter. They're not interpreting his actions the way I am.
It's the thing that triggers you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Why does this certain thing bother somebody so much and the next guy
Yeah.
doesn't bother him at all? Why is that, right?
Yeah.
That's
Can I comment?
Joel. Go ahead.
Tracy and I talk about this a lot. And what we come up with is that everything that we see and experience is a projection of ourself. And so when there's something, we say, pinging us about something that we're observing or experiencing, then it's pointing to something that to look at in ourselves, right? And so then as soon as we, point the finger at the other person and then turn the finger back to ourselves and find whatever that is, and it helps to, I think this is in the Pathwork, to really put it in a simple sentence or phrase what it is that's disturbing, right? He's manipulating and withholding by how he's acting with these assets. He's being selfish. Something that expresses the feeling that you're having trouble with in the other person, and then we will look for that in ourselves, and that helps to dissipate it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that would go back to like me accusing him of greed and entitlement. So I need to look for that in myself.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because when I engage in this process, a lot of times when I'm thinking about the other person, I have a very strong emotion, let's say that it's at a level 8 out of 10, that I'm finding a fault with selfishness. Then when I find it in myself, I may only see it in myself at a level 4, but I don't, just the fact that I'm now putting the focus on myself, it doesn't matter that it was an 8 for the other person anymore. I'm released from that.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to feel it at an 8 for the other person so you can actually even see it in yourself, maybe.
That's right.
Yeah.
It needs to be disturbing.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think that's the way that we talk about it with each other. So our lower self is helping to point the way for our higher self, where we need to bring more light and love and understanding.
Amen.
Amen. That's a
Yeah,
great way to
very
look
true.
at it.
That's nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joel.
Amen.
You're welcome.
This is Marion. I would like thank you so much for that, and a lot, Joel and others. Is that it brings to mind me personally, because my dominant personality defense is submission. Now, it's two sides of every coin. The other side of the coin is aggression. I'm not going to flip into aggression and be aggressive with everybody. That's death. However, in learning about, we have a triad nature of the defense being your reason, will, or emotion. Some people, their dominant one is going to be aggression. And so they're going to try to defeat other people when they feel defeated. Me, I'm going to, if I lose connection with somebody, I will get more submissive and give up all my real needs, hate myself and hate the other person, but keep it hidden. And then the reason type, who does not have the structure to allow deep emotions to flow through the energy body, is going to get very intellectual and talk about things. So it's like knowing your type is liberation, because we have 1 or 2 to the 4. So if somebody else in my family is real aggressive, well, I'm not like that. And I attract that type because I'm looking for a little bit more assertion. So I have to go through my aggression. And others are attracted to me because they want their heart more. So, they want to dominate me to try to get something from me. So it's like all these vicious circles of the defense. But the clarity comes with the conceptual knowledge and then getting the right support to go through these tunnels. Thank you. Thank you for listening, because mine has been so totally liberating, my submissiveness, going now practicing aggression, but not with people, with my higher power, my therapist, a good friend, and really letting it rip. And I'm mean to everybody, but not really. I'm clearing old stored memories. Thank you.
How do you apply that to the reason type?
Well, there's all charts on this, so I don't want to take up a lot of time. The reason type, because they don't have energetically in their body a tapestry for the deep emotions to flow through them to be expressed, and it feels like death for deep emotions to go whoosh like up through a pipe. So they have to slow that down by going intellectualizing. They cannot be forced to express a deep emotion because somebody else, like their mate, who's an emotion type like me, would like them to be more expressive. No, it's like death to them. It has to be in increments. It has to be slow energy body healing. It has to be really very soft with that type, because they have a deep, big heart, deep feelings, but expressing them, those deep emotions, is death, and they get intellectualizing.
Yeah.
They have to slowly build a tapestry so those can weave in and out, those emotions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, anyone else that hasn't said anything so far?
Hello, this is Juan. Can I be heard?
Hey, Juan, I didn't know you were on the Juan. Hey, Juan, what's happening?
How are you?
No camera?
How's everybody? Thank you all for sharing.
No camera.
Hello. How's everyone?
You can't turn on your camera?
Thank you all so much. Thank you so much for sharing. Beautiful sharing, and really thank you, Alan, for really pinpointing or really making with highlighting, I'll say, the points of the lectures. I mean, you really, I mean, everybody said it already, but I feel that I need to say it again. I mean, you did a great job there, pinpointing the main, highlighting the main points of the lectures. And I would just like to, if I am allowed to comment a little bit, my perception of it anyway, what I do understand from the 3 points that you mentioned. And, the first one that really, number one, that really touches me is the first one, the first point where, the guy says that the entire universe is permeated with this vibrant life substance, that is malleable, that is really shapeable. And, the way to shape that is through our consciousness, through our awareness. I mean, to me, that's like so powerful. That's like, my God, it's like basically everything is out there. And, anything that we ever dreamed of, that we would ever want to have in our lives is there. And the only reason we cannot tap into it, the only reason we cannot bring it into our lives is simply because we are not conscious of it, because we are not aware of it. And to me, that's big. That's big. And, and it really encourages me more to really keep working on myself, to really become aware of all these aspects of these areas of myself that I don't know about, that are hidden in my subconscious somewhere, and that are such a burden, such a great blockages, forbidding me from really, being this higher being that I was meant to be. So to me, that's like really, really huge there, and and just so incredibly. I don't even know how to say, but it's really, really impacting to me just to realize that just because I am simply not aware of myself, because I don't know myself. There is so many aspects of myself in areas of my side that I am not aware of. Is the simple reason why I cannot, be enjoying life to the fullest and being, this great being that I was meant to be. So that part of the first point really, really touched me greatly. And the second one is that, this other part of the mobility and relaxation, how really, I mean, that we human have that perception. To me anyway, it seems that way that, I tend to think that when I am relaxing, let's say when I am meditating and I'm just, sitting cross legs or sitting in a comfortable chair and meditating, nothing is happening. I'm just like, nothing is happening. It's like no movement, nothing is going on. But it's such a misconception, because so much is happening in that state of relaxation. We're creating immensely. We just don't perceive it. We just cannot, be conscious of it, I guess. And then on the other hand is the misconception that only when I'm running around like a chicken with no head and, doing this, that, and the other is the only time I am accomplishing, is the only time that I am doing things and making things happen. And that's such a great misconception that I personally anyway, I keep working on myself to really become more aware of that aspect of my personality and to bring to myself that awareness that, there's a lot happening when this feminine energy, I think I also sometimes calls it masculine and feminine energy, a lot happening in both states, and in the actual combination of the two energy, that of relaxation and movement is really what causes everything to happen. It's really what keeps the universe together and evolving, and this contrasting and expanding is really the process of creativity. It's really the creativity itself. And yet we don't seem to be, quite aware of it. And we have this a tremendous misconception that, when we are in a state of relaxation, nothing is happening. And on the other hand, tense and, running around is the only thing, when we are creating. And, I really need to do personally a lot of work on myself on that, just to really, become aware of that this is not so at all. So, and then there is a third point of this pleasure. I mean, you guys may have talked a lot about it already, and this negative, the attachment to or this negative pleasure to the positive one, and that's, the guy actually says it, that this is what creates evil in this world. If that negative, drive, that positive drive was not attached to this negative, there would be no evil in the world, really. And to me, that's just so incredible. And, on page 4, this second paragraph there that, kind of like impacted me a little bit was when he says that the pleasure is experienced even in inflicting cruelty or enduring the cruelty. So it's just not basically, yes, a criminal and serial killer and all that can be doing all that, but also there are people who actually, by accepting and by enduring cruelty also can get great pleasure. And, it's just incredible, and, to see that. And, and I think I have come across people like that. Or sometimes you look at someone, it's like, my God, why is he or she taking so much pain? And why don't they do something about it, or at least run away or do something from, remove themselves from the situations? And yet they don't. They don't seem to want to. And, that's just seems to explain to me, with this lecture. He helped me understand, I guess, the way I perceive it anyway, that this is what's going on with these people. They seem to be enjoying this cruelty and the endurance of enduring this cruelty. And it's a crazy thing. And and he always, like you mentioned, Alan, I always wonder why. As we know, evil is a bad thing. It's a destructive thing, and it's not good. And, it's totally against the divine principles. And I was like, I would think sometimes, like, my God, how can a criminal, how can a killer be so creative and, so, altruistic with the way they go about to destroy and do harm. And but with this lecture, and with this part of the lecture, this third point, I clearly understood that, they connect that, that pleasure principle to this negative, and even though it's negative, it's destructive, because I guess we have that power to really connect it to. I guess God gave us that power to, with the free choice, that we can do that. And, and unfortunately, we see that happening in the world so much. You see these crazy dictators like Trujillo, the Dominican Republic back then in the 1930s, and then Hitler and all these, these very, very destructive people. They're so genius with the way they do things and the way they orchestrated, they deeds and the killings and the destructiveness that they do. But that third point actually did help me understand that, this is what's going on. They actually, do that, unfortunately, connect this, this pleasure drive to this negative, and, that's how they get so creative and that's doing so much harm to, to themselves and to everyone around them. So, so it's great point. Thank you, Alan, and thank you for selecting this lecture. You and Tracy really did that, so thank you so much. I think I have learned so much from just going over it and and highlighting some of these points. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you so much for all your very perceptive comments.
Thank you.
Juan, just on your second point, I wanted to ask you a question. It's funny, you pinpointed meditation as being one of the areas of inactivity that seems to be connected with you towards this kind of, item that's being brought up in the lecture. And it's funny because when I'm reading it, I'm thinking sitting on the couch and eating potato chips or something, So, that's the level of like inactivity where I'm like, I feel that, let's say, that guilt of doing absolutely nothing. When I'm motivated to just meditate, right? I guess I get over that because then obviously I'm doing something which I guess is focused on some level of progress or growth or achievement or something, whatever that might be. And one of the turning points that I started feeling within that meditative process, because for so long I had a hard time kind of feeling the energy flow through me when going into meditation. And what I started doing more was coupling meditative state with slight movements, bodily movements, because I'm so intellectual, or at least intellectually based initially. And also I generate a lot of emotional activity underneath or with that, from that intellect, that the thing that gets me out of that vicious circle is to get up and move, to get up and do something, or to, you know, so in running, I feel wonderful, right? I'm super meditative. I can accomplish so much more meditative state-wise when running. But in a seated meditation, sometimes what'll happen is I can't feel what's going on. I'll be kind of stuck, like, you know, so have you ever experienced anything like that yourself, where you feel like maybe nothing is happening? And in that case, have you ever tried to add some level of movement, whether or not it's like Tai Chi or some kind of, you know, arm movement to feel the energy flow within you, these kind of things?
Yeah. Well, personally, I do meditate every day, actually twice a day, and but before I do that, there is some actual physical exercise that I do practice, just to get myself and to get the physical body into relaxed mode. You know what I mean? Into relaxed state. And of course, some of that is some yoga, asana postures, or some like I do a headstand or a shoulder stand or head to knees, and I get myself into that relaxed state also before I go into the actual meditation. And when I say meditation, I mean there, as we know, as the guide explains, there are several ways to meditate. The meditation I'm referring to is that meditate that the guide actually also mentioned, where you just be, you know what I mean? Would you just kind of let go of all the stress, of all the thoughts, of all actions, and and everything. You just let go of everything, and you just sit there and just concentrate at a certain point or a certain mantra. Some people do. Even though I just use a breathing technique, and that's what I was going to say. Before I go into this state of basically neutrality, I would say I practice some breathing exercise and thinking and relaxing the body, just so that I can be in that state of neutrality, or that state of that neutral state where I can just see there, push all the thoughts out, let go all the worries of the day and all concerns, and just be in that state of that state of void, that state of just being and allowing that energy basically to flow through me. And when I do that, it's a great it's a great place to be, because more often than not, I just burst into tears of joy and this peace that you feel, and even your body becomes even more relaxed and kind of chill, and you feel your own flesh, your own skin, and it just feels like cold and so relaxed, So to answer your question, then once I get to that, then no, I don't find the need to go into any movement at all, because the body is already sort of prepared to be in that state for whatever time I have, an hour or 45 minutes or whatever it is, the time that I set myself to be in that state.
Right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Could I make a comment as well?
Surely.
Yeah, thank you for that one. That was a beautiful description, and your dedication and commitment is quite remarkable. So Kevin, what I would say in answer to your question is that it's all about connecting up, right? It's connecting with our higher self. And so whatever supports that, right? So for you, the sitting becomes too distracting, right? But the movement bring into connection with your higher self. And so that's the purpose of the meditation, right? I see you have a lot of beautiful guitars on the wall behind you, and I presume that you, and I see a keyboard, and so I presume that you enjoy playing as well as displaying the instruments. And so for some people, a meditation takes the form of more of a creative process. And so that's the vehicle, if you will, or mechanism to connect you with your higher self, where you stop thinking and you're being, right? And it connects you with your heart self. And so they're different. I've taught meditation for many years, and I guess I learned from Tracy that while I tend towards sitting meditation like Juan, there are these other forms, walking meditation, or
Right.
or yoga, but many different things. And so go with what encourages you to continue to connect.
As an educator, it reminds me of the kinesthetic learner, that they basically can't focus and learn anything unless they're in movement. So I think, like you said, it's just different people are able to focus and learn in different ways.
Yeah,
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 Joel,
it's interesting. I think with Joel's comment, it really struck home, because as a young child, I was always coloring or doing art or doing music or doing something in that way in order to access the higher self. I was always good at being able to intellectualize and think and learn. Let's say, to Darlene's comment, I could learn by sitting still, but to reduce the mental, the best way to do it is to start some activity, whatever it is, not no activity, some activity. And I know, like, there's the meditation where you centralize your focus on an object in order for everything else to disappear, and then ultimately, you can do that too. But what you said, actually, Joel, really resonated with me, because in fact, I feel more meditative some days just going about my day. All day I'll be stuck in like this pleasant higher self meditative state where nothing will interrupt me, and I'll just go along, be whatever, and be elevated and able to ponder things just very gently, like able to just almost touch on things. But yet if I just sit down, it's like, oh, eat, suddenly the brain starts kicking in, because that's like academic. Okay, sit down. Oh, this is thinking time. I think my one channel that I have, which is just barely enough to get by, is like just always focused on one thing. So if I focus it on, like activity, it helps me kind of let go a little bit, like you said. So thank you. Thank you for that, for all of your contributions. It's very helpful.
You're welcome.
Okay, Marcella, do you have any thoughts? Teresa, anyone?
I'd like
Oh,
to.
Ellen, go ahead.
Hi there. Yeah, so I would like a little help with this actually, because I was very excited about the lecture, but then as I went through it, the part about mobility and relaxation, that's very close to me, because as a singer and a singing teacher, and for the work that I've done with singing is very much about finding the relaxation within the activity, and of course as a musician. And so, sorry, my phone is ringing, and I can't decline the call. So I can see it. In terms of the pleasure being associated with negative things, it's very obvious to me in our current president. Like, if you look at him, to me, he's like the perfect example. And it happened like now with his niece's book. It's like you could read that. And it's like, so with continued, repeated conditioning towards the negative, like that seems like really clear to me. I can see it externalized. But so in my own experience, I feel more the inverse, which is the pain associated with positive drives. It's much harder for me to see pleasure associated with negative things. So like in my childhood, I was like, to have this great example. I wanted to go to the High School of Performing Arts, and my mother really cautioned me, like, you can't get up early in the morning. Like, this is just a memory where I can, like, oh, I had this, excitement about something, and it was, dashed. and I have so many examples of that. But
Where you made a choice to remain safe, you mean?
yeah, and also just leading to a lot of passivity because of anything that was, excitement for me became associated with disappointment, or so. But it's very clear, like, with addiction, like, I don't have any extreme addictions with like shopping or food, it's like, well, you're definitely getting pleasure from negative. So I see that it's at play, but I can't really, and I feel like I've explored this. I think like some of these things are in the Course in Miracles, which I've read a lot. But I'm having a hard time connecting with it personally.
Well, it also helps to write things down, to write those conclusions, like what you said about passivity. What you said about the high school performing art kind of reminded me that, I got into Bronx Science, but my mom didn't want me to go because she didn't want me to take the subway because she was afraid that I couldn't take the train and something bad would happen. So I didn't go. And, like an opportunity missed, so like it's safer to be passive, right? Because it's scary to go out there. That's an attachment of the life force to a negative situation, I think. So I think it helps to just put things down in writing, as many things as you can recollect.
Yeah. Yeah, Ellen, does your passivity bring you any form of pleasure or contentment?
Yeah. It's so weird because I've heard over and over people use the word negative pleasure, and that doesn't make any sense to me. Have pleasure, how is pleasure negative? So I'm saying this because I have a hard time, not passivity. I mean, if I'm actually relaxed, then it's pleasure. But if it's just depression. To me, it's just experiencing as depression and blocking of life force and deadness inside. And I have the only time it goes to pleasure is if I go online and I shop. So I suppose that's like an example of then like a sublimation turning into pleasure, turning into a momentary pleasure that then turns into pain in the long run.
I think the guide is saying that the passivity or the depression, that's a pleasure. That's an indulgence. That's a pleasure that you have, but you don't see the price you're paying for. In other words, it's easier to experience it than to kind of unearth it and uproot it and examine it.
I know. I mean, I guess I found, because I feel like I'm familiar with this, and I find it extremely, I don't know, I feel like I've had other people, like, even like when people say, what's the payoff? What's the payoff? I don't know. I found that's only led to guilt. And like, really, I feel like it's only led to worsening of depression and patterns. That thought process is like, it's just, I don't know. It just really.
So I had a lot of trouble with this word pleasure, and almost to the point where I couldn't even read the lecture. And so I just said, well, let me try to expand the definition. And so what I did was I said, well, let me think of it in terms of feeding myself in some way, not necessarily negatively, but some sort of gratification or connection with my inner self. So I took a specific example when I was a little boy. I find it helps to think of specific instances where we're not functioning in the way that we would like, or we've had negative experiences, and what about that might have been not necessarily pleasurable, but self-sustaining in a way. So I thought of what would happen when I would sometimes I would get yelled at. My father had a bad temper, and I'd get sent to my room when I was a little boy, and then I would sulk, right? And then I thought about it some more, and I realized I would probably hold my teddy bear, right? So maybe I was 6, 7 years old. So I just tried to go back to that time and remember what it was like to, because I contributed to the situation of getting yelled at. I wasn't completely innocent. My father would be giving me clues like, I'd be joking around. You need to stop. It's time to go to bed. Stop, whatever. So that was helpful to me, is to rather than trying to understand it intellectually of how it was gratifying or pleasurable, because I had trouble with that word pleasurable. So I just tried to go back to an experience where I had kind of had difficulty, and then see what would that experience feel like, and how was I giving something to myself with that. Does that make any sense?
Oh, maybe I'll explore it. I mean, it's sustaining, so it's just like that. That's like the survival, the defense, the survival. How you are maintaining your survival. Is that kind of what you're describing?
Wasn't even survival. It was like self-care in the time where I had been, expelled to my room, sent to my room. I was separated. It was no longer included and embraced, right? I was rejected. And so what did I do with that rejection? How did I respond to that? And so in some way, I was comforting myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just brings to mind a sucking your thumb or something else.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, I love sucking the thumb.
Pleasure of the past.
Yeah. I used to never come to dinner when my mom wanted me to come to dinner. When I was a kid, she'd say, "Come on, dinner's ready." And I'd say, "Well, no, I just got to finish this last page of this book I'm reading, or I'm still doing my homework. I'll be there in a minute." And she'd say, "Come on, it's dinner, it's hot, it's on the table." And my dad, "Come on, it's time for dinner now." And like, I wouldn't do it until sometimes they'd get really angry. So I think that maybe that was sort of a embedding in myself of the conviction that I was really needed. I had to have the proof that I was really needed. I needed to have the kind of validation that even though the anger occurred, and like, of course, as they said, I didn't realize the price I was paying for that. I guess that's maybe negative pleasure in a sense, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Of course, negative pleasure, when you take pleasure in somebody else's misfortune, that's obvious, right? And that's, if somebody gets shot down at work and they're in your department and you're thinking, hey, this means that looks better for me. I mean, that's something that many people can relate to, right? But I know that I don't do that anymore because I realize it's like a bad look. And not that it's a bad look. That's what we say that in transit. It's a good look or it's a bad look. But no, what I say is that I really know the price is not worth it. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
For me to be competitive with my friends and my pals and my team is not good. And I don't do it because I realize that it hurts. So that's a case in which I think of the recognition of the negative pleasure has created the desire for me to go beyond it.
Yeah, good example.
Hi, this is Marion, and it really is so helpful to hear each of your personal stories and examples. And because I mentioned something tonight that I'm very cautious, I never talk about it with anyone, and I did tonight a little bit of that. I became aware of people not showing up the way I want them to in my life, and who are the dearest, closest ones. That's my daughter and son and my 4 grandsons. If I ever show you a picture, or you ever met them, you would be just taken with the beauty of these souls, the beauty. What am I doing? I'm going through my lower self. All expectations lead to disappointment and pain. I'm going through the shadow side, but with what the guide said, with the hand of God, my personal God, I would never dare go through this without that, because I know it's getting triggered in me. They do not cause my feeling of abandonment and being left and not acknowledging me and ignoring me and reaching out to me. So in going through the shadow side, I literally kill them all off. I literally chop them up. I literally, but never without the hand of my personal God, who I tell and say at the moment, I am doing this to release what is already stored in my energy body that these souls are triggering. Now, that doesn't erase everything. I've been doing this for a couple of years now. Then this last week, I laid down on my bed, not intending anything. I made the bed. It looked nice, and I flopped down on it. And something shifted. It's just exactly what the lecture is saying, because of all the work I've done for decades, not just with them, but my parents, everyone. The shift came. I laid there, because I'm always in the thing, they owe me. I took care of these little kids when they were, they all owe me. I shifted into that state of knowingness that I did all of that for them because karmically, not punishment, not karmic punishment, but karmically, I owed that to them in the back and forth of karmic playback in reincarnation. And it came as such a calm, peaceful knowing. And this is just a week and a half ago, all of you, after years of doing this through the shadow side, through the darkness. And I laid there in peace, knowing that I owed them, not as a punishment, but as an honor, to pay them back karmically something. And it did not have to keep going back and forth. It was all ending karmic connection with these souls, which allows for total unconditional love, and that's where I'm heading, and I'm allowing. So thank you for listening, because this is so important, this going through the pain to pleasure, going through, and it can't be without a deeper connection of surrender. It cannot. So thank you for being there, because I'm so fortunate to be with all of you. You make it so safe with your love and intelligence and your power. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian.
Thank you, Marian.
It's really great to hear you talk. And I just wanted to say something else came to mind. I wanted to say this before, actually. Marian Williamson said, which is so illuminating, which is about that evil always has conviction. That we need to have as much conviction behind our love as the evil forces, because it has to have conviction to go to destroy. You need force to destroy. And I thought I should say that out loud, because I think it's partially illuminating of why I because I keep those forces in myself at bay. I'm out of touch with the way the pleasure, because I try to dampen my aggression.
Mm-hmm, right. Well, that's a positive quality. The conviction, the ability to determine and will and create and go for it. That's obviously very positive.
Right. But it's so often used in negative. I mean, the forces that are violent, right? They have conviction. It's so obvious in the world when that conviction is put towards negativity, and the people who love often will stay. Peace and love. So, I mean, that just seems so clear to me, and I feel like that's at play in my personality.
Right, that's a good point. I mean, obviously, Gandhi and MLK personify the positive, what the guy calls positive aggression, which is critically necessary.
Right. But it's also, then they were killed, right? And it's the person who's so negative, the loving people are not going to kill the evil person, right? The evil person kills the loving person, but not the loving person killing the evil person.
Well, except for Star Wars, because like if you cut down Obi-Wan, he's even stronger than he was, right? We know that.
Right.
Ellen, I guess think of all of the positive actions that go on in the world that are motivated not by conviction against something, but rather delight in bringing the light. Okay. There are a lot of powerful light forces, and it depends each of us on our walk whether or not we see them and how we see them. But I think we all see them in varying forms. It could be a child's cry or a child's just smile that brings us into that place of innocence. or it could be painting a mural on a classroom wall
I'm
with
not
some of our
denying that.
friends.
I feel like I'm
Yeah.
not exactly. I'm not denying. I'm not. You know, I'm a person of light, and I see light everywhere. I
Right,
just. I was
right.
just. I was really feel like I'm. I don't know if I'm not.
Well, it's very important, this whole concept of the attachment of pleasure to negative situations. That's where the power is,
Yeah.
you know, that you talk about, and that's why it's so important to unravel it. The guide also talks about what he calls pleasure supreme in some lectures. I think that seems to be a unified pleasure, the pleasure of the unitive state where there's no conflict. Pleasure supreme, that's a nice concept. Maybe we can differentiate. Yeah, you know, in another lecture, the guide talks about the fact that in the future, there will be many different words for things which there aren't enough words for now. And, you know, one is reminded that allegedly, right, the Eskimos have like 12 words for snow or 30 words for snow, you know, and that there might be 4 or 5 different words for pleasure. When our psyches, when we are developed enough to understand these concepts enough to give them names.
Yeah.
Good point.
Other languages have them actually more than we do.
Yeah.
Other than English, it's one of our problems actually.
Alan?
Yeah, Rita?
Yeah, thanks. I love what you were just saying and tying that in with what Joel said about pleasure and the word pleasure and finding a wider way of describing it. So what you're saying, Alan, is to take that moment where I would say, I'm trying to come up with an example. I applied for something, I auditioned for something, or I applied for a job, I didn't get it. And so it's so great to not get it because then I can feel crappy and talk about how crappy I feel. And I'll have and lots of people will understand that. But if I got the job and it was a great job, then there's always that, especially people who I currently work with, would they actually be happy for me? Would I still have friends? Maybe no one would like me anymore. I would not even have my current colleagues, and who knows if I could make more friends. And there's so many unknowns and all of that. So
correct. Well, that is the ego talking, Rita.
Mm-hmm.
That is the ego basically in a box. It can't take in the pleasure. It can't take in the rejection. Everything is bad, right? It's a state of not unsatisfaction. Duality, correct. Duality.
So,
that's right.
So when with the negative pleasure or the attaching to the negative, it's a risk. So what is it that the ego is not willing? So I'm trying to find the key. The guide's talking.
There are
what's
many.
the price?
Well, there are many. Yeah,
The unknown.
There are many keys, I think. I mean, one is surrender to God's will. You know, like what should I do? How can I surrender to the situation? What is, if you pray for what God's will is and are prepared to sacrifice, then I think you'll get to a better place. In other words, you don't have to force things to be the way that you want them to be. And the reason you attach negative pleasure, in other words, the reason it's hard for you to overcome either the good thing or the bad thing is because you hook into it. There's an image there, right? There's an image, the pathwork, and a wrong conclusion about getting something or not getting something, right? In other words, you can't be easy with whatever the truth of the situation is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You can't be, what was the last part?
You can't be easy with the truth of whatever the situation is.
That's a tough one. It's a tough one to not be easy with what the truth of the situation is.
Because, you know, the guide says in some early lecture that sacrifice is the key to everything. If you are prepared to sacrifice for God's will, then you can get the certainty and the security that you are craving. But the sacrifice is real. You have to be prepared to humble your ego.
Okay. In a future meeting, can we explore the let go and let God? Isn't there's a lecture on that?
There is.
Because I can say, and I won't go into it now, but that I have focused on what is God's will, and I have, I guess, so much resistance to knowing that I feel that I don't hear it. And I even focus on being open. I focus on that I am open to knowing. I am, and I still don't have the certainty. I have what could be, but I don't have the certainty.
I think that's a very good thing to explore. Very deep. Is Tracy with us? Is she listening?
Tracy's here.
Because I miss hearing from Tracy. And whenever we talk about, there she is.
We're sharing one phone.
What do you think about what Rita said?
Well, I mean, tonight's has been really.
Oh, just talk to us. Yeah, go ahead.
They're having difficulty knowing what voice to listen to in herself, to know how to make the right decision.
About whether it was the higher self or the ego self doing the talking? Yes. Is that what you want me to?
Or God's will.
Well,
know when it's God's will
versus your own. You know, it's funny you should ask this, Rita. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I have to put the phone on the cord, so I'm gonna have to put it down. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I was doing a meditation this morning, and I was listening to Eckhart Tolle, and somebody asked this exact question. Of course, there are no coincidences in life, and he answered it this way: that when you're in the ego personality, when that's in charge and doing the talking, whatever it is, you're looking for something to happen in the future. So that was the trick that he used to differentiate, because sometimes, whereas if you're in, he calls it presence, but it's higher self. Whereas if you're connected up to presence or to your higher self, you're just right now. So he was able to differentiate whether especially as he got more famous and he got to be, a best-selling author, et cetera, whether or not who was driving the ship by looking at this timing.
Mm-hmm.
Because the ego personality isn't always going to be doing bad things. We talk about like the ego, as if it's a negative thing, and it's really your foot soldier, not to be confused with the lower self, which, as Joel pointed out, which I thought was interesting, it also can serve you well by shining a flashlight on those areas that need your attention. But the ego is your foot soldier. So I always like the little saying, the higher self, your God energy can give you the inspiration to go to church, for example. But your ego has to get yourself, get out of bed and take a shower and get dressed and drive over there, or walk over there, or whatever. So it's not necessarily bad, but that was just something that I heard this morning.
Well, I think also Rita was talking about a choice being either bad or good. In other words, feeling recriminations or the downside of a choice, right, Rita? In other words, that getting the job is great, is problematic, and not getting it is problematic, right?
Yeah. Well, really, the guide says that, and as long as you're on Earth, that there will always be circumstances that, I'm paraphrasing, that circumstances that accompany every choice or circumstance. So I accept that, but I mean really literally when one is faced with a choice that must be made, like do I move from this place? I have to move. Where am I going to move? Or I have to get a new job. What kind of job? And will it, those sorts of things.
I think there are techniques and ways to refine that choice and make a good choice that the Pathwork talks about. Don't you, Tracy?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I have to make a choice, a decision, which sometimes will appear on the surface as binary, I can feel into it at this point. When I'm making the right decision about anything, I just have this very calm, still sense of doing exactly what I should be doing. When I'm going down the wrong road, even though it may be very subtle and you could use your mind to convince yourself that it was really the right thing. We're all really good at that, It nags at you. You feel this this thing kind of nagging at you in the inside. For me, it actually kind of has a physical sensation where it almost feels like there's an animal or squirrel or something inside of my gut area, kind of nagging, scratching, kind of trying to get out. Even though in my mind, I can totally convince myself that this is the right thing to do. But that feeling, that scratchy, it's scratchy. It doesn't go away. So you get very fine-tuned into it. And I'll tell you a quick story because I thought it was fascinating. Our son, Chad, who some of you have met, he's a professional poker player. And he has to use what I call, his gut instinct all the time in playing poker. And he said he was playing the other day. He had 3 jacks, which in his mind, you never fold 3 jacks. That you just don't. But he went to swipe the little toggle for all in. And he was going, everybody else had dropped off at the table except for this one other man. And he said that just as he went to push the swish button for all in, which his mind told him, absolutely, you're all in, you never fold 3 jacks because it doesn't get that much better, in a small. He said he got that feeling. He said, Mom, I just got that feeling. He goes, and then I picked my hand up just in time before I.
Nope. Tracy?
Oh, I'm hanging for the end of the story.
Tracy,
Come on.
Hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Now we can hear. Yeah, Tracy, go ahead. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. That's a quote.
You can am I still audible?
Yeah, talk. Go ahead.
Now you are.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know when you lost me.
When he was just about to go all in.
Oh, when he was just about to go all in, he literally had his finger on the swipe button, which, to toggle the button from left to right to that would have been all in. And he said he got that feeling. And he said, and he goes, and I just quickly picked my hand up off of the little toggle button before I could do it. And he folded, even though his mind was going, no. And then the other guy had 3 jacks. The other guy had 3 queens. So he said, he's come to be able to recognize that feeling. And each person would probably get it in a different way. It's your higher self, your gut, or whatever you want to call it. For me, it actually kind of, like I said, it's almost scratchy, like there's a squirrel inside of my gut or something. When it's wrong.
When it's wrong, you feel a squirrel?
Yeah, like a scratchingness, like
Not, okay. Well, what do you feel when it's a positive?
Like when it's right, it's like a total, just like a knowing. You just know, it's a total sense of peace, and almost like you're centered right on your pin, and you know that it's the right thing. You're in the right, you're doing the right thing. It's very serene, and but it's more than that. It's very much like as if you imagine a pin going through your entire body, like if from head to all the way down, and when you're right centered on it, you know, it's not catching you anywhere. Whereas if you're kind of, if you really had some kind of rod right through you and you weren't totally centered, you'd feel it, it'd knob up against you. So it's almost like the absence of, for me anyway, and I think everybody would, I don't think Chad would describe it this way. I think everybody would describe it slightly different, but for me, it's a physical feeling.
Very
and so almost the lack of the physical feeling, the gnawing, when it's right.
Mm-hmm.
You know when it's right, you know. I think we really do. I think we really know, but we try to convince ourselves when we don't like the answer. And this reminds me so much when I was working in corporate Maryland, still now because still practicing law, and I'd give somebody would ask me, blah blah, and I'd give the answer when they didn't like it, and then they'd ask me again, and so we do the same thing to ourselves, because when we don't like what we know, what we really know is the right thing, then we use our mind to try to convince ourselves, that what we are doing or not doing, sometimes it's not going forward, is okay. It's the right thing. But we really do know.
Can I just, an image just came into me when Tracy was talking about listening to God's voice. It's like when you're tuning in a radio and you're getting all the static, and the static goes away. You've tuned into the station, but when you're getting all that, I don't know, that image seems very apt.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
And then the other thing.
Here, Joel, you want to try? We're low powered, but I'm going to hand this back to Joel so he can talk.
So just very quickly is to look in the past and remember times when you made the right decision, and how did that feel? Because we're training our feelings and trying to sync that with our mind, right?
That's a very good way to do it.
It's going to be different for everybody too, right? So
well, the feeling of ease when you make the right decision that Tracy's talking about, there's a feeling of harmony or serenity. So go back to that feeling and say, unless I feel that way, this is not the right decision.
Exactly. That is the way I do it, Alan. The way I do it is it's the absence of the gnawing that I'm looking.
The guide sometimes says that we have extremely accurate perceptions that we often don't listen to or discount, like of other people and their energy. We feel it. Like the guide says in some lectures, you really are not concealing anything. You think you are, but you're not. It's just someone who's actually able to perceive these things. So there's a lot. If we can open ourselves to realities, decisions, people, there's a lot we can perceive that we often choose not to, I think, or prevent ourselves from doing because of our habitual patterns, right? Our compulsions or our attachment to negativity to pleasure, like the guide's talking about in this lecture. That we would rather take the negativity with the pleasure than take the risk of not having the negativity and just having the pleasure.
That's a big one. To really accept pleasure and happiness fully. That's a big one. Not easy. Not easy. But it'd be worthwhile, whatever you need to do to get there.
It's harder to do that than to go the negative route. The negative is easy, right? The compulsion is easy.
It's comfortable.
It's comfortable.
To be in a negative feeling, I'm not sure, being unsure, or just feel lousy, or have a headache, whatever it is, it's familiar. Right. And so I choose that over, oh my God, I might be happy. Scary.
Right.
Right. But we have to be like those Christians who triumphantly and joyfully went into the arena to face the lions. I don't know about that's a little heavy, right?
That's heavy.
Whether you can actually you can be
how
triumphant.
Alan's mind works.
Maybe you think the lions are going to claw you, but they really won't. Okay. Of the abyss of illusion, right?
Also, that we think we know, and that's part of the problem. You think you have a decision between this or that. But if you really let go, as Rita was talking about, if you could really let go, there might be another 5 or 10, something totally different than you could
Absolutely.
ever imagine.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's the beauty of letting go.
Mm.
I
That's right.
call it finding the rainbow. Like we always see black and white, and that's the dualism. But if you can let go of that and see the rainbow, like there's just infinite, choices, right?
Yeah, I'll buy that. Yeah. To the extent that we can perceive them being here on Earth and anchored here within our bodies with our
Yeah.
dualistic.
Sometimes in that moment,
Sometimes.
I feel like I'm grasping, and I can tell I'm grasping. And when I know I'm grasping, I need to let go. And then the rainbow comes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then sometimes I know I'm pushing away. And then when I know I'm pushing away, I stop pushing away, and then the rainbow comes. So it's just a question mark at that point of hearing that gnawing. Which way do I go? How do I let go of that movement, that ego movement, or that lower self movement?